All right, so we are live. Everybody, welcome to tonight's live chat. We have a special guest, and I think that we're going to learn a lot of things. Every time I talk to Cory, I learn a lot of stuff. It's not often it's about bees or anything, but um, it's nice to know that, in all seriousness, that we have beekeepers who are looking into genetics, and VSH is one of the things that we have been talking about, Cory and I, over the last couple of years, because we're looking constantly to try to make better bees that can hold back varroa either completely or make it to where our mite treatments aren't having to work so much. But this is a complicated issue. There's been researchers and individuals for decades who have tried to figure out this very complex problem. Cory has got some really good ideas and tricks. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the queens that I got from him performed. The queen cells performed very well. I got over an 80% take in the middle of summer, which is not the best time for us. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. So Cory's going to join us here in just 1 minute. Thanks everybody for coming on. We're constantly trying to bring you information that's not always stuff that I'm very knowledgeable about. And this is definitely something that I don't know very much about. So Cory does artificial insemination and so much more in the redneck country of Missouri. So without further ado, Cory Stevens, everybody. Thanks for joining us, Cory.
Hello.
All right. So you ready for this?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's that time of the year, Cory, where we're fixing to get into busy season, and we still have a little bit of time. But this is right now where we're trying to educate ourselves to be better beekeepers and kind of get our equipment and everything ready so we can do a much better job this year. And this is also the biggest lying part of the year for beekeepers, where we tell ourselves how much we're going to accomplish this year.
The dream state.
That's right. So, Cory, what are you planning to try to achieve this year exactly? I mean, you don't have to give me all the details, but I'm just kind of curious.
This is I'm looking forward to it. There's a couple of things really. As far as just my beekeeping perspective, I've bought a lot of woodenware and I've got a lot stacked up that's ready to put bees in. And so I'm cutting back on open mated nooks and whatnot and just filling woodenware expansion.
Well, I mean, I definitely know that feeling right there, and it's one that actually I'm not doing right now. I'm actually kind of holding my numbers where they're at and considering going down. It's really weird because I spent the last 20 years trying to build bees up and equipment, and so it doesn't feel right at all. So when I came out to your place where you live, it's absolutely a beautiful area, and you had all those pollinator plants planted for the bees and butterflies and different creatures to be able to hit, and went out there and I picked up, I believe it was around 75 queen cells, and then I have the AI'd breeder queen that you made, and she's doing very good. I checked them today. And number 74 is getting busy. There's about a frame and a half of brood right now.
Excellent. Yeah, I saw your update video on that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I didn't. It was kind of a random thing. You know, we were looking to hook you up with some queen cells to try our stock out, and I happened to have a breeder queen sitting in there, and I was like, hey, you know, what do you think, Cayman? You want to try one? I don't really want to go make a nuke for her, and it worked out.
I was like, twist my arm. So when it comes to different goals and stuff, one of the things that I would like to see, and apparently I'm not the only one, is this one right here. We want to make queens your full-time job, Cory.
I would like to hear that. I'm working on a plan now to where that might be a reality in the near future. So that couples in with expansion. So Short Pants Bee Farm, I appreciate all the support I can get. But that's another thing too, is what else are we doing this year? Well, I'm starting like I guess you'd call it a breeding network. Mm-hmm. It's with some commercial beekeeping friends of mine. I want to have a world-class breeding operation. I think it's off to a really good start. But if I had to criticize myself, I would say the hang up is, Cory's got 150 hives he's testing. Well, selection size, that would be better. So instead of 150 hives, we're going for thousands this year, and actually put commercial pressure on them too, which has already happened. And it seems like it's working really well, but it takes a village, as they say.
It does. And I'm a big proponent of treating bees at this point. I have, and as you know, we talk quite often, but I think it's never a good idea to get comfortable wherever you're at. So if you're a beekeeper who is like myself, who is treating on the regular, I think it's always good to see what can we do to push things forward. I don't like playing catch up. It'd be nice if we could get some forward progress, and part of that is what can we do to help our bees by basically helping them help themselves. And I think that's kind of what you're trying to do with VSH. And one of the things that I'm hoping is that, I mean, hey, if we could get immune bees to varroa mites at some point, that would be fantastic. But even if we can make bees that retard varroa on average by 25 to 30%, that's a massive number. And it might not seem like it a lot, only 25%, but let's think about this. 25% over a 10-month period of brood rearing in Tennessee, that is thousands of mites that are not reproduced.
Absolutely.
And so why don't you give us a little bit of a rundown, Cory? You got a couple slides for us, and tell us kind of some of the nuances, because VSH has kind of changed how they select, and there's a lot of stuff I don't know. So let's hear it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of stuff the scientific community is still kind of picking apart, learning. Obviously, you're going to keep learning because we don't know it all. The more you know, the more you know you don't know. But on the flip side of that, we've made a lot of strides, and there's more eyes than just what was originally looking at it. That I love this slide here too, because this is where the rubber meets the road. IPM. You know that I'm trained as an entomologist, and so I look at it. They drilled IPM in our head. So with IPM, that's why we're doing all these alcohol washes. We're getting data, and so with that data, we've got a treatment threshold in mind. So there's a lot that goes into that. You're taking into account how much money we're spending, how much time we're spending out there, what the miticides cost us, and also if we don't do anything, what's that going to cost us?
Because all of it.
Yeah, all of it, exactly.
Maybe.
That's definitely possible. It wouldn't be the only person that's ever happened to. So that's why we're doing the alcohol washes. But it's a double-edged sword. I think that's what the Jews were talking about in Genesis when they start talking about cursed earth. It's like we got to work and we got to figure stuff out and we got to do something, not just sit around and enjoy the fruit because we screwed it up. So what that means is we have to be paying attention to what we're doing, and that's what we use these alcohol washes for, is to establish a threshold so we know when we should treat and so we know what's going on in our hives. But everybody skips over this, and I call it the holy grail of IPM, is host resistance. In the scientific community, there's a lot of chatter about it, but I think it's a hard path. Like anything, it's more painful up front, and I think more painful up front with mystery and not real sure about this stuff. What are we doing? I think that keeps us from focusing on a lot of this stuff, but I don't think it has to be that complicated, really.
Well, sure, but it's almost always the hard things that are the things that need to be done the most. It's anything worth doing is never easy. Was something that my dad always taught me growing up, and basically the things that we've done that seem to have mattered the most were some of the hardest things that we've ever tried in our lives. And we definitely lost some sleep and maybe a couple years of our life and a few more gray hairs along the way, but it takes a lot of work to be able to move forward, but we must move forward. The mites, viruses, other problems, they are going to move forward. So, what are we doing as beekeepers to do that? Not all of us have the time to do that or the knowledge, and that's kind of one of the reasons why the fellow up there was talking about making you a full time dude. I think this is maybe one of the problems that we have in the industry is since it is a small niche market, we don't have quite as much money in this market as most industries. And when there's not as much financial incentive, then it's hard to get progress. It's just like with, well, any of the Varroa treatments, we still have Varroa treatments that probably need to go, and we definitely need new ones, but there's just not a huge money incentive to get us new products. And I really think that money and business must be the driver, whether it's Queens, whether it's Hive Life and Bee Education. Run it
Yeah.
like a business. And so we love to see this VSH thing go into the business mode and make it to where basically you're just a slave to the bee industry, Cory.
Well, right now I'm a slave to the pet care industry. I would much rather pour my soul into the bees. I've been trying for a while. You know, I've this all this stuff that I've done, breeding, learning, working bees, I've done it all in my spare time. And I think we've made huge progress. And it makes me think, if I can do that in my spare time, what if I just am able to make it work financially to where I can just do nothing but this? There's no telling what could come of it, especially not just for me, but whenever I plug into a network of, somebody mentioned in the comments just a little bit ago, like what we would have to do to make this work. It does come down to money. I hate to say that, but you said it.
I don't.
But
I used to, but I don't anymore. Hive Life would not be possible without all the people working together and through our YouTube channel, and then deciding to give us a chance, and that brought a lot of people to it, and education, products. And if I would have not been able to afford to leave my truck driving job, I'd be driving a truck for Averett hauling Dollar General redneck supplies.
yep,
And so, that's where I think that, if we can get you and other guys like you to privatize this a little bit more, that would be good for the industry. We need as many people working in this industry as possible. So I see you got resistant mechanisms, and this is probably the biggest question that I personally have is there's been a lot of changes with VSH, and I only know a little bit, just enough to be dangerous. So can you break down for me and everyone who's listening kind of what VSH really means?
absolutely. And the thing is, too, is this is an ongoing discussion. So I'm going to give you what I've understood, and I like to speak from experience, not theory, because they're completely two different things. I've been messing with VSH for over a decade, and there's some stuff I've noticed that I didn't even hear people saying for a long time, so I don't even think they were really paying attention. But I put SMR and VSH together because whenever they first found it, they didn't know what was going on. It was John Harbaugh and company at the Baton Rouge Bee Lab, USDA lab. They just knew somehow these bees are suppressing mite reproduction. They get mites. It's not like they're just, oh my gosh, they're always mite free. That's not the case. But they could measure that they were suppressing mite reproduction. Had no idea other than that what was going on. Well, then they figured out that it was a hygienic mechanism. So they were suppressing mite reproduction. They could measure that. That's what I measure, suppress mite reproduction. But they were finding the mites that had babies in the pupa, in the cap. They would uncap them and throw them outside. So it would completely break the mite's reproductive cycle. So they changed it to Varroa sensitive hygiene. And lately there's more and more and more knowledge coming out to let us know more about this. So some people are calling it different things. Other universities are kind of doing their own thing. Like Guelph has low Varroa growth, LVG.
Hmm.
I think a lot of this stuff is like, if you have a couple rabbits running through the brush, this is how my redneck mind thinks, and then you have beagles chasing them.
Hmm.
Each beagle could be a university per se or an entity that has grant money. Sometimes they think they're hunting different rabbits, but they're on the exact same trail. So I think some of this stuff there's a lot of overlap too, and that
Sure.
kind of makes some smoke and some confusion with all the terms going around. But that's the nuts and bolts of it. There's more to it than that, but basically they're sniffing out reproductive mites and they're throwing them out. Now, I wanted to list all of them on here because I'm hung up on VSH or SMR. That's not the only resistance mechanism. So I think if, like Purdue Lab was really interested in aloe grooming, they were the ankle biters, the mite
Hmm.
biters. So what those are doing, it's completely different than VSH. The bee will wiggle or it'll wiggle around because it knows there's a mite on it, and its nest mate will bite it off. That's really cool. And so
Hmm.
maybe we need to put several of these traits in the same brood nest in good time. But that's allo grooming. Auto grooming is whenever the bee will groom itself. Like Tom Seeley's bees, they were Varroa resistant, like in the R naught, but they're super swarmy and they limited brood production. So
Hmm.
they I say, they're Tom Seeley bees, and I hope someone doesn't think that's a
A
derogatory,
negative thing.
a
Yeah.
negative thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't come across that way. It's just that's not what I want. I want something more along the lines of what Cayman wants. I want it to make honey. I want it to be commercially productive. I want to have them respond well to a nectar flow to where they grow and you have brood for splits. And we all know, as a colony size affects honey production. So if you've got little bitty, tiny, super swarmy bees, they're not going to be worth a lot commercially. They're not going to make grade for almonds. And what
And
I'm
and
after, go ahead, sorry.
oh, I'm sorry. And that's why I think what you're doing is important because if we want to make a big difference, we got to make this worthwhile commercially because these guys, I mean, these commercial guys are around 10,000, 15,000, 5,000, sometimes 40,000 colonies. If there was a commercially viable mite resistant bee that still worked for them, gave benefits, then we are just throwing all kinds of good genetics all over the United States.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
when it makes sense on a business scale, I mean, financially, when things are cost effective, I mean, it just makes a lot more sense. So, auto grooming, Tom Seeley bees, and Tom is more into, let things get back to nature
Right.
and all that kind of stuff. But, that puts me out of a business. I'm back to driving a truck.
Right. Yeah. And I'm back to shipping trucks because that's what I do. I do logistics and
Oh,
transportation.
you're one of those guys. Okay, so
Yeah.
that
Well,
makes a lot of sense.
I used to be the dude that was loading the back end of your 18 wheeler, your 53-foot van or whatever you were pulling. I worked the dock through college whenever I was studying agribusiness, and then I just got hooked in transportation. You know how it is. It pays good. If you're not scared of work, you can keep the lights on.
Yeah, you can keep the lights on. If you could
Right.
just get those darn guys to load the truck a little faster, life would be good.
Exactly. I had some pretty good guys though. We got stuff done, and if I needed to, I wasn't afraid to get on the forklift too. Except one of my jobs, I was supervising union guys, so I was just a talking head. Almond pollination, yeah, that's the thing too. Is like I said, I feel like we're already getting measurable results. One of my buddies, Paul Landsberg in Missouri, he runs I think close to 1,000 colonies, but he's running bees out to California, and he's used my breeders for 3 years or so. And he posted on it was something Ian had shared, Ian Stepler, and Paul commented on it and said he'd been using my breeders. And if I can quote him. Hopefully, I don't butcher it. But what I gathered from it was he has he treats less. The bees seem to keep lower mite loads. That's the goal.
Mm-hmm.
He says his winter loss is better. He's losing fewer bees over winter. And he said he has a higher percentage of his colonies that make grade for almonds. Bing. I mean, that is exactly what we're after. Right.
Show me the honey.
Exactly. They got to work for us. But the problem is, though, is historically, and this comes in on my end, if you read any good breeding book, they'll tell you, why aren't these awesome bees everywhere? Well, not even a high population of beekeepers raise their own queens, which I hope changes. Definitely not a lot of people are selecting for certain host resistance mechanisms and whatnot. And the biggest one of all is there is no monetary incentive to do so. Mm-hmm. And like, you know how young kids are. You'll read it, you're like, psh, we'll figure this out. And like I cheated, I would sell not open mated virgin queens. Now, good genetics, but I would cut that labor out. Like my breeder queens, some of them I didn't even let them lay. I took a play from John Harbaugh's playbook. The one you got wasn't yet laying. I just inseminated her. And so I cut that nuke making out, and I cut out all that labor, and I bumped the price up. And I was destroyed, to be quite honest, because I went back and did a profit analysis because it all comes down to the numbers. And I'm like, this is ridiculous, really. I mean, I was making way more money off of virgin queens than I ever thought about breeder queens. And anybody can raise good virgin queens, so the breeding thing just wasn't, I'm still sorting it out. And I think part of it was I have my day job too. I think whenever I can pour myself into it and I can do more, more of a commercial mindset, higher volume, and still keep a reasonable price, I think I can make it work. But man, I got to come up with some other things to supplement it too. Cause
sure.
Yeah.
Do you have more on your slide? If not, I've got a couple questions that people want to ask you.
Go for it. What you got?
All right, Chris. Why aren't the questions? There we go. There we go.
It's a good question. Alan asked, Cory, is your main line VSH Italians? Forever, that's what I had. They were just super blonde looking, high VSH expressing bees. And through the years, I would make outcrosses. And the last major outcross I made was with some of John Harbaugh's stock. He's the guy that retired bee scientist. And I knew his stock tested super high for VSH. But he says, I don't care what color they are. I want them to be high VSH. So through the years, I can't say I have just strictly an Italian bee, but majority of my bees are going to be a lighter colored bee, but we'll get everything in between, from a few darker queens, some tiger stripe queens, some dirty Italians, where they're kind of dusty. They got a little bit of a banding on them. And then some just look like a giant Italian.
Well, and you can't get everybody what they want, because some people are really into those Italian genetics, especially the guys who are wanting to use them on a commercial basis, because they're shaking packages, they're taking bees to almonds. They need certain sizes of bees as early as possible. Actually, something that I would like, and in your spare time, Cory, I expect you to get on this. I would prefer one that has more carny characteristics, where it shuts down earlier and is more flow sensitive. Because I think if you had that VSH on top of that, would make it even. I think it would have to stand to reason, because they will shut down. It's like the carnies that I run will shut down in November, early December, and I won't have any brood in those colonies. But if I go to the ones that are more Italian, I'll have brood in a mild year almost every single month of the year. And so it's hard to kill with oxalic acid. So I'm at this point, I'm looking for a bee that can make it to where my mite treatments are going and not having to do so much work. Kind of like what
Paul.
Paul Landsberg. Yeah, what he said, because at this point, we kind of know what we've got to do to keep our mite levels low, but it always seems like this is where we're at, and this is where disaster's at. We're real close. We'd like to get it to where there's a little more separation there.
Yeah, it is exciting, but yeah, I would definitely like to see more separation there. But I think we can. I think it's completely reasonable. And I don't mean to muddy the waters here, but you would always see that little chart where they're like, Italians are constantly brooding and they'll eat themselves out of house and home. They're gorgeous yellow. They're super gentle. They would never harm a soul, and then they have the stereotypical carny and everything. I think mine's somewhere in between. Like, because I don't feed the heck out of my bees. We have a fair fall flow, but they're not some of those that are going to put you in the poorhouse immediately. So it's somewhere in between. Like they will shut down completely at times. And, if there's nectar or pollen shuts off. But I don't know. I don't have a bunch of other bees to compare it to. So I kind of just have to go off of feel. But overall, they respond well to nutrition. So, I mean, you're going to have bees to work with, bees to split, bees to make honey with. Are the VSH lines a gentle honeybee? They keep getting better. I don't wear gloves, but I don't pay attention to it, but my wife says if you watch me handle bees compared to some of my friends, that have been over here or helped out or whatever, some of them aren't quite as smooth. They'll kind of jerk or pop or I don't know. It's just
so you're a pretty smooth operator, is what you're saying.
the wife says I'm a pretty smooth operator.
Yeah.
But I don't wear gloves. I keep them handy, but I would say overall they're fairly gentle. But whenever you outcross it, sometimes you'll have a little bit of aggression pop up. I wouldn't call them aggressive, but every year it seems like they're even more workable. But back to where the ones I had in the past were amazing. But every time like my favorite, I mentioned it to Ian, my favorite Tom Sowell quote is, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. So whenever I would outcross with something, my VSH scores would go up. But then I'd find a couple that were jerks or, I would lose another thing. So I'm kind of getting isolationist now. I haven't brought anything in. That's why I say every year I feel like they get better because I have my closed population and we keep moving it towards goals. But I'm not making any wild card outcrosses. So yeah, sorry. That's a long way of saying they're fairly gentle. Yeah.
Well, I've got several of them, and I've had a lot of different bees over the year. I think on the scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being least aggressive and 10 being very aggressive, I would definitely put them in the lower categories. I wouldn't say they're a 1, but they're definitely not a 5 or a 6 or a 7 or anything like that. They're somewhere in the lower categories, and a lot of it depends on the time of the year. I was just down in Florida, and when there's pollen and nectar coming in, all bees will give you their best.
Yeah.
Our bees, I would think, are actually slightly more gentle than the VSH, but ours will staple the socks to your ankles when it is July, 100 degrees, and there's nothing to do except pick on the beekeeper.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good description. I'm glad you had that perspective too, because like I said, I'm kind of in an echo chamber here because I only see my bees.
Well, I've liked what I've seen so far. They've definitely come back, mated. The cells were high quality, and of course, I get a lot of questions. Cayman, what do you think of Cory Stephens queens? And I said, well, it's really, and that's what's so hard about testing queens or even testing a lot of product. It takes time, and they, the queens started laying the first week of July, and so and I made them into splits that had relatively small populations, and they built up, but they seem to do very well, and they're overwintering. So as we produce honey and go throughout the season and build a mite population up, and hopefully not a large one, we'll see what happens. And I think that we need to be very realistic with our expectations. I know your goal is absolute Varroa dominance, and I wish you the best. However, I think as beekeepers, we also have to be a lot more realistic with not just your bees, but ankle biters, um, mite maulers, all of those things. I know people who get them and say that they absolutely suppress everything, but I know people who have purchased them, sometimes that person being myself, and they do buy you some time, but you still have to have some mechanisms or treatments to
Yep.
go along with it. And how often are you splitting your bees? So whenever we create brood breaks, we are affecting the mite population as well as the bee population. And so I think that's where we get a lot of variables from one beekeeper to the other beekeeper. Is this one saying, oh, it's working really good for me, and they've got some nice VSH or bee that will chip away at them and suppress them a little bit, but they're also selling 3 nukes per large colony a year. And so they're breaking up the cycle, and they're also selling off a portion of mites more than likely,
Exactly.
whereas the backyard beekeeper might not split their hives at all. If they don't want to, they're like, I'm already at 4 hives. That's all I want. And they try to keep that population just right there. And those mites, especially the beekeeper does not allow them to swarm, they might not even get a brood break all year long. So there's a lot of dynamics to this. I think we need to be patient. And I also think that we need to, as a community, not just in VSH, but in other areas, we need to come together and educate ourselves and put our money where we want to see the most change.
Yep. I totally agree. And I appreciate the reasonable results too, because we got to start somewhere. But at the same time, I think we can get measurable results. Like whenever we test for VSH, we're measuring suppressed mite reproduction or
Sure.
SMR. And there's a lot of benefits that come along with it too that are kind of unexpected. Um, but yeah, reasonable results. But two, we can't, we need to keep that IPM framework in place too, because it doesn't matter if I do have every single one of my bees is 100% VSH. If I'm doing commercial pollination and I'm all over the place, there's no telling what you're exposed to. Like Bob Benny, well, I think it was last year, maybe I was talking with him. I don't know if it was in that panel discussion at Hive Life or if it was a different discussion, but he was saying that he was working with Dan Purvis because I know Dan well, bee breeding master, but they achieved. They don't know exactly what it was. I think I don't want to put words in Bob's mouth. Matter of fact, I would love to talk to him more about this. But they felt they had resistant bees. Now that's a broad term. It could cover anything in that slide and more, probably the mite resistant characteristic slide. But that's whenever he said somebody dropped 500 hives next to him, and I was like, oh, that peckerwood. That's whenever all that happened. Sorry. I discussed Grace Salmon's conference. But
I know it. I thought we were done. I thought we were done with that. So here's a question. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna interject. Whatever you're up against, you don't know. There could be somebody that has carrying high mite loads that's right next to you, and if you fall back on that IPM and you're doing some alcohol washes and your load is climbing, you can intervene as necessary. So we should stick with that, but
Mm-hmm.
definitely work on host resistance. So, do you want to
So
look at David's comment
yeah.
here?
So Cory, how does your bees stack up to John Harbaugh's bees? I have Harbaugh Queens. Thanks from Alton, Missouri.
Yeah, I mean, I've implemented some of his genes in mine. Um, Whenever I made the first cross, and it may just because there was an outcross, that's whenever I was talking about I get some pockets of aggression. The same thing happened years ago whenever I made some crosses with some of the Purdue bees, and man, some of those were aggressive. Like they would follow you, super annoyingly aggressive. Not all of them, but a few. So how they stack up against them? I mean, you'd probably just want to try them side by side and see how they do in your area, but I feel like they're comparable. Um, I mean, John's a master breeder. I don't know what else to say exactly.
Well, you got to say the right thing, and like he's great and all that stuff. But you know, I know you, Corey. You're over there going, yeah, I've got the best.
They're not bad. I'll leave it at that.
They're not bad. They're pretty darn good.
And I
And
think that's the thing too is I don't think I have it all figured out. I don't think I have all the answers, and I don't think
never will.
exactly. I don't think I've learned everything I'm going to learn. So they're doing really good now, and I think they'll get better.
So,
Do we have a breed break where I'm at? Yeah, definitely. Either I'll take a split out of them, like Cayman mentioned, although some of them I really delay from swarming, or if I'm not paying attention, they'll try to swarm. So yeah, bees want a brood break one way or another. It's usually me giving it to them because I've made I'm not a mathematician, but I can add, and I would, make the example. I can get 100 queens out of a really big colony that's wanting to swarm over a 3-week period. I sell them for $25 a piece.
mm-hmm.
And do the math there, or you can let them swarm and have a nice brood break, and watch all that money fly out into the trees. So I give them a brood break. Some of them don't get one though, because some of my breeder queens, I'll run double deep colonies with an excluder and then 2-3 supers on top, and my breeder queens will make honey oftentimes, and I don't break them until they start getting swarmy. And sometimes they don't, and I'll just end up splitting them down anyway, just so I don't lose the breeder queen. But yeah, I would say most of them get, a spring brood break.
So something I'd like to interject here real quick. So we did a lot of alcohol washes. I need to post this information to where everybody can read it. But so we were testing 52 colonies this year, and these were all commercial queens out of Georgia. Italians that are made to shake bees and go to almonds, those kind of characteristics. And a lot of people say that those are bad genetics. I actually would argue with it in some ways. I think if the queens are mated properly, the bees are good. But they have no mite resistance.
Yeah.
They're actually very good at making lots of mites. And
Right.
so what we found installing them in April is that when we came back and did the first wash the first week of June, we weren't even averaging a third of an infestation. A lot of them were zeros on the alcohol wash. Occasionally one, there was one or two that were 1% infestation, but most of them, I think that the average, if I remember correctly, was under 1/4% infestation throughout 52 colonies. So it looks really darn good. This is the first week of June. We come back in the first week of August, and now we're averaging almost 1.5% infestation.
It's on, man.
It's on. So 1.5% is not that bad. And these are massive colonies by this time. And we're talking each one has 3 deep boxes on them. We've been feeding them, drawing out combs. They're powerful.
Oh yeah.
But they're 1.5% infestation at this point. And that's when we separated them into their 4 groups. We balanced it all out where you had some that were a little higher infestation, some of them a little bit lower. And Dick Brickner and a couple of the other fellas from the Columbia Beekeepers Association really helped me a ton with this. And Richard took all of that information, balanced them out equally. We had 4 groups, one for Randy Oliver's extended release oxalic acid sponges. We had a control group that received no treatment. And then we had a thymol group. And then we had a oxalic acid vapor group. And the point that I like to make is that when we came back the last week of September, the control group had more than 60 mites apiece in an alcohol wash on average.
Yeah.
So that was quite insane. The other groups obviously were less because of the controls and the treatments, but the control group had one of them that had 126 mites in the wash, another one that was borderline 100, and that is just mites propelling out of control. And so the reason I kind of say this is, these are packages. These are fairly small colonies starting in the spring. That's how quickly in Tennessee those mites can build up. And those bees went from looking awesome and drawing out like 30 frames of comb each that season to especially the ones that were in the control group crash, because even though we treated them afterwards to try to save them, the viruses and the damage to the bees was already quite done. And so, and that's what a package bee on average can get you, or at least with my experience. And so that's why we treat so heavy. I treat 3 times a year. From a professional standpoint, I'm hoping that if nothing else, that your bees will make it to where my treatments are going to, just be overkill, way overkill with those bees. And then we can dial it back and go, okay, maybe instead of needing 3 treatments, maybe I only need 2. And then I'm
That's
starting to
cool.
save some money. Holy smokes.
Yep.
And
I want to add something there
sure,
too. You touched on viral loads getting out of control. A lot of times it's not just the mites, it's the amount of viruses that those bees hold. That's another cool thing about VSH. Back in the day, I noticed because I like to experiment. Mom said whenever I was about Jimmy's size that I should be an entomologist. So, I mean, I'm just finally fulfilling my destiny here. But
should have listened to your mother a long time ago.
I know it's true. I have to learn the hard way, Cam, and I have to learn from the burn. But
Hmm.
what I did here is I would notice deformed wing virus, like withered wings, where they're, you know what it looks like, but some of your viewers may not. The bees emerge and their wings look like 2 little pieces of twisted yarn. They're never going to fly. They're nothing but a drag on the colony. I would see that rampant in a colony, and I would just switch the queen out. And I would put an F1 out of one of Tom Glenn's VSH breeders in there and not do anything because I'm a weird person like that. And I would just see what happens. Within 6 weeks or so, whenever that brood nest changed over to VSH bees, you will not find a single bee in there that has withered wings. They completely cleaned it up. So, are there mites still in there? Absolutely. I'm sure there are.
Hmm.
But that's whenever I realized they have a strong viral resistance. And I think Kara Wagner's touched on this a little bit with her UBO assays, which lucky us, we get
Hmm.
to trial some this spring. So that'll be really cool to see,
I'm
more.
really looking forward to that. Can you explain that to everybody real quick on kind of what the hope is and the goal for that?
Yeah, is that the UBO?
Yeah, so Kiera Wagner, it's a spray that's going to help beekeepers be able to select quicker and easier. Which that's this has always been a kind of a tedious thing. So anything that we can get to make it quicker and better, obviously, is going to make people more prone to use it. So kind of
Right.
explain how it works and why.
Yeah. Well, UBO, Kara Wagner, she's at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. She was doing research where they found out that I guess it was the bee or the pupa that had mites in with it. They were putting off unhealthy brood odor. So they synthesized those chemicals and they figured out exactly how they can spray the comb. And the bees, well, if they're UBO sensitive or super hygienic or even possibly VSH. Like where that line is, we don't know exactly. But they spray a certain size on the comb, and then you come back and 2 hours later and you look at it and you see if your bees uncapped everything. So if they uncap it all, they detected that, hey, there's unhealthy brood here. What's going on? And they pulled the cap off. And then they're like, hey, what's going on here? These brood are fine.
Which means they're more hygienic because they're paying more attention to those type of issues.
Right. And if you watch her presentation, whenever I was watching it on, I think it was Humberto's channel, Inside the Hive TV, he's the one
Yeah.
that first caught that interview. Well, she was saying these bees, if they score at least 60%, most of them you can get away with not treating. Because she's saying, like, if they score 60% or better, they're so mite resistant that you can almost get away with it. I wouldn't say you can totally get away with it, but the results in a scientific study were so pronounced that there's a correlation here. But she went even farther and said the viral levels on these colonies at the colony level is extremely low. And that's when my spidey senses perked up. I'm like, wait a minute here. Are we talking about the same thing? Because I've noticed, you can you haven't dug through my bees. We've walked around in my apiary, but we haven't dug around through them yet. Like you
Hmm.
won't find a bee with deformed wing virus. And I'm one of the I, well, I haven't used miticides in 10 years, and I don't promote that as a management strategy. But for what I was after, it was like taking the blinders off. They either have it or they don't. And
Hmm.
I noticed that they just stomped out deformed wing virus. And Randy Oliver had some samples. I sent him samples out of my bees. He wanted untreated bees too, I think, so they could see how god awful the the deformed wing virus loads were. And I got the exact opposite. They tested for A, B, and C, and I sent him all VSH samples, but it was deformed wing virus A was BL, below quantifiable levels. It was there, but they couldn't even hardly measure it. Deformed wing virus B, BL, below quantifiable levels. Can't It's there, but they can barely measure it. Deformed wing virus C, non-existent. So, and that was after not using acaricides or using miticides. So they still get mites, but they suppress mite reproduction, so you should have lower mite loads. If you're right next to some dude that's ate up with it, your mite loads are going to rise. Late summer, your mite loads are going to rise, but they should have less. And they stomp those viruses down so hard that I think that's one of the reasons. Because Kara showed in the UBO that they had way better winter survival rate. And I think it's because not only do they check those mites, but the viral loads don't get so high. Because a lot of times that's the problem. The
Hmm.
mites are spreading it around, but the viruses just get so bad they just collapse, like some of the ones that you saw, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, prior to, well, my time in beekeeping, especially in the early days of Varroa, the colonies could withstand much, much greater populations of mites before a collapse. However, we have new strains of viruses and some strains that have taken on kind of a whole new life, that more aggressive strain of the virus. So we've got those things that have compounded upon the mites' ability to attack our bees' immune system. Of course, the mites are injected in there, but obviously, if you have lower mite loads, then it's going to affect the viruses immediately. But I'm sure there's also something to bees being more hygienic and clean.
Yep.
There's and it goes much further than just varroa or viruses, but bees that are
Yeah.
more hygienic definitely stomp out European foul brood
Chalk
and
brood,
chalk brood.
American foul brood. Like you're not
And,
going to see it anymore.
and if you
It's
read a lot of, go ahead, Cory.
I was just going to say you shouldn't see that anymore because I used to see chalk brood too before I switched to VSH stock. I mean, it's
Mhm.
swamp. Well, I live in swampy East Missouri, so if you have anything that's susceptible, you'll eventually, I think, find it. I did. Maybe I'm just unlucky, but whenever I switched stock, I haven't seen one cell of chalk brood since then, and that was well over a decade ago.
I really think that there's a lot of reasons outside of mites to consider
Hmm.
um, more hygienic bees. So I had a question real quick. So, and thank you, Rylan. I also want to thank Dave Dwyer for donating to this live chat and making this possible. So, Rylan, what time of year do you treat Cayman? So I do oxalic acid vapor in December, at least 2 times, and that's when my bees are most likely to be broodless. There's a question about what is a brood break, and that's just when your bees have no brood into the colony. So if your hive swarms or a set of bees in the wild swarm and they go into a cavity, right then that's a brood break, and there's no brood. The mites are reproducing underneath the capped brood, feeding on the developing new bees and reproducing and making more mites in there. And so when there is a brood break, it makes any of our treatments more effective. It makes hygienic bees even more effective because all of those mites are out and about and they're able to harass them if they have those traits. And mites don't live forever either. So the longer they're without brood, it's going to shorten their lifespan. But I treat in December. I treat in late June, early July. As soon as I get the treatments, the supers off, honey supers, I treat them, and then I will usually follow back up in August, late August, early September, with another treatment and suppress those mites to where they never get to high thresholds where I have to worry about that being an issue. I am trying Cory stuff out, and to kind of preface where I'm at on this, because a lot of people know me as the guy that treats and tells you great queens, dead mites, and good nutrition. If you can achieve dead mites through other means than treating, then that's fantastic, but it must be dealt with. It must be dealt with. And I have tried treatment free in the past. And the problem is, and I think Cory would agree with this, there's been a few con artists over the years in the treatment free realm who will take bees that sometimes have no characteristics or say that they're doing the testing and they are not, and they're flipping bees. And how do you know? And honestly, the internet can be a great way to sell a dishonest product, and I think it has done that. And I think that's why YouTubers have gotten a lot of a bad rap over the years. However, that's one of the reasons why we're kind of hoping that guys like Cory will get more traction and be able to spend more time helping us out. And it goes well beyond Cory as well, that we need more than just Cory in the United States doing this. If Cory can get a good line of bees, and then a few other people can as well, and create a system, because think of the logistics here. I mean, we have millions of queens in this country, and so we're going to need a lot of genetics to be able to spread that around. So it's a big problem. It's nothing. It's not anything that can be fixed overnight, but it is fixable, I think.
Agreed. And we've already seen that you can make big progress. And the thing is too, is like you said, there's a lot of queens going around the US. And I think as once the cool kids start doing it and there's less smoke and mirrors around it, and you're seeing measurable results, and people are seeing, like Paul, are seeing results in their own operation, then I think we'll turn the tide then, because I feel like you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have large colonies with nice brood patterns that'll you can measure 100% suppressed mite reproduction on. But it doesn't need to just be me either, and that's why my YouTube channel is not nearly as cool as yours, Cayman. But my thought is that
Laurel runs mine,
yeah, right. I'm gonna have to talk to Jamie. I need some help. But my thought is to put education out there too. Like, this is what I'm doing. This is what I've seen. This is what I don't know. And if I'm doing this full time, if I can make a break from the corporate job, I want to put a lot more of that out there. And
sure.
The thing is too, is it doesn't just need to be me doing this. I'm happy to sell queens, and I hope I can make this work monetarily. But the thing is if Cayman applies some of the similar, if you're interested in breeding, I know it's not necessarily your thing, but if someone in your area was like, okay, well, this works, I could apply this, but I'm going to do this differently. Well, then we have, maybe VSH or allo grooming or whatever in different parts of the country. And a lot of people act like we have so much inbreeding and so much lack of diversity. I think it's just because, there for a while, everybody was ordering from the same guys that were grafting off the same queens. If you have like the microbreeder effect, and everybody's kind of doing their own thing, then you have something to outcross. Oh my gosh, Jamie's watching.
Yeah, Cory, be
Did I,
careful. This is dangerous territory.
have I said anything that I shouldn't?
Well, Cory, I'm glad that we at least got you on before it was too late. And
I hope it was useful.
there was a question earlier that I saw about if you get, let's say someone purchased virgin queens from one of your breeder queens, and they made it. There we go. Thank you, Chris. You sell virgin queens with VSH. How much of the VSH characteristics are kept if they're mated with local stock that probably is not in those traits?
A really high degree, at least in the first outcross. And here's the thing too, is like people ask, that's probably the most asked question I get. And the response I give a lot of time is it totally depends. So If I mean, how much did you buy? Was it actually VSH? Because there's, as you said too, there's a lot of con artists that'll just
Yeah.
Ian. No, she's not.
Well, everyone used for the first and last time on the Cayman Reynolds show, Cory. Uh,
No, she's a good wife. She's not a pushover though. She'll
no,
definitely
well,
she'll give us what we deserve.
that's right.
Don't
Well,
like that.
she's got to make sure that you work hard. That's the way mine is. She's like, if you're gonna play and goof off like that, you're gonna have to be go out there and stay busy because I can't have you goofing and playing that much. And so she cracks that whip. But so the genetics from the virgins,
Yep.
you
Back to that.
retain a lot of genetics, huh?
Yes, and the thing is too is I think John Harbaugh had a paper out too. I'd have to go back and dig for it, but it was basically showing if you have, if you're grafting off breeder queens or a really high VSH stock, if you outcross it, that F1, the whole colony displays that to a high degree. So there's multiple ways of looking at it. Yes, if you graft out of her daughter and her daughter and her daughter and her daughter, it could get muddy. But I make a YouTube video of how do I check for this stuff. So if you pick out a few that you think you want to graft out of, check them. And if you graft out of stuff that keeps testing high, I know my goose is cooked as soon as I'm off here.
Blink twice if you're under duress. Don't do it, Cory. It's not worth it.
Send help. No, the thing is with those versions too, is those all how drones don't, or let's see here, yeah, drones don't have a father, only a grandfather. So if you're buying virgins, which annoys some people, but the advantage of it is all those drones that you're producing, if I did my job right, are VSH. So you're sticking it in your local population. And if you keep selecting for it, it doesn't have to go away at all. But if you don't select for it, it'll probably muddy just like any other trait. But another cool thing is too is a lot of you guys that have cattle, if you put a Charolais bull in with a bunch of Angus cows, you get a hybrid vigor or heterosis. So whenever you're buying a virgin queen from Stevens Bee Company, it goes to Tennessee, it outcrosses with unrelated stock. You should have excellent brood patterns, extremely low, if any, inbreeding, and you should have high VSH expression too.
Well, I think a lot of this all boils down to consistency. You mentioned the virgins, so obviously when she mates with drones that may not have those characteristics of VSH, they'll still have other characteristics that are beneficial to the colony. And any drones that she produces will have those VSH characteristics because those come directly from the queen. And so you're pumping out drones that are going to hopefully service some queens in the local area, whether it's yours or somebody else's. And that's where the whole consistency thing goes with this. And I want to say a big thank you to Rob Searcy for donating again to our live chat. We really appreciate you, Rob, and thank you, sir. Also, Steve White says is lucky enough to win some of the VSH Queens at Hive Life.
Awesome.
We want to say thank you, Cory, for donating those because
sure.
We were able to raise just a little over $16,000 at Hive Life, 100% for young beekeepers next year. So we've already well surpassed last year's by 50%.
Woo.
And yeah, so we're going to have a lot more kids next year. I say kids, I mean, these are teenagers. Half of them are already very successful at splitting bees and grafting queens even. And some of them, heck, they're running like 100 colonies and wanting to do commercial pollination. And if we're not careful, Cory, we might be out of a job. We got to keep it up, but it's exciting to see these young people get involved. And we appreciate you helping us out with that, Cory, a lot.
Absolutely.
So a lot of questions still down in here. And let's see. You have an excellent opportunity to improve your drone population with those same virgin queens. Yeah. And there was a question earlier. And so, since this is a question by Gus Mitchell, who runs Russian bees and is part of the, and he works with a Russian bee breeding program, there was someone asking what you think about the Russian genetics. And I, I know that's kind of not your thing, but I always enjoy putting you kind of in high pressure situations, Cory. So there you go.
I've never run them. I've had buddies that did that had really favorable results with them. And you know how I am though. I kind of muddy the lines between races anyway, between Italian Carniolan. It gets to be a lot deeper than just color. I think the Russian bees. I think it was awesome that they brought them in. I think they've got immense potential. They're running them commercially too, the Kois and some of
Mhm.
them. So I think they're pointed in the right direction. I don't know if they're specifically VSH testing anything. They could, because VSH isn't a breed of bee, it's an additive trait. So you can stick it
Mhm.
in, it's stuck in Tennessee now, Cayman. Look what you've done. Like wherever you take it, it's going to be there in some degree. And even if you didn't buy it, if you just started with XYZ bee. So I think it would be cool to see, because I always hear about Russian mite resistance. I think they carry some natural resistance mechanisms. I need to read more on it, and I'm sure Gus could school me.
Oh yeah,
Do a great
Gus,
degree.
Gus in school. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to say real quick, this comment, I brought my 13-year-old to Hive Life this year. Man, did it light a fire in him. That's awesome. That's what it's about right there. We need young people to get involved in it and see that there's exciting new things in the industry. I started when I was 14, almost 15, into beekeeping. And so there was a lot of mistakes I was learning in my teens, and that I'm so thankful I didn't have to learn when I had kids and a job and all those kinds of things, because it's difficult, and it still was very difficult doing it the way that I did. But your son Luke can is learning stuff from Bob and Cory and other people like that, that I had no access to, and it's super exciting. I think there's a good opportunity. There's, whether it's on the industry side, more innovations, whether it's genetics like Corey's doing, whether it's education, researching. There's plenty of opportunity, and we hope that so many more young men and women will decide to make beekeeping their home.
I
Wow,
know
what
that.
did you hear that beep?
Yeah, that was somehow Jamie's phone receiving a text.
Okay, are you sure that's not her texting you? And
No, I saw it pop up.
okay, that's fine. It sounded like almost my fire alarm was going off in here. Beep. Almost, I'm like,
Jimmy, what are you doing back there?
exactly. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. What is my son trying to do?
Gus has another comment here. They don't do VSH testing specifically, rather mite population growth monitoring, which is super useful. More focus on a balance of mechanisms of resistance. That's definitely super useful. Because I don't think we should put all our eggs in one basket. Dinner.
Dinner bell. That's what I'm talking about right there. So here's a question: if I bought virgin queens, what is the best way to introduce them to get mated?
That's a great question, because this is the number one reason that people are automatically kind of turned off to virgin queens. I've given you a couple examples of why they're good, but introduction was an issue. I figured this out the hard way. I found it out through my introducing breeder queen. So I would make up nukes, and Sue Kobe is who I learned artificial insemination from. So she's like, put the cage in there, let it set for a while, a few days, and then whenever you inseminate them, you can just turn them loose. They've already accepted her. So I kept turning them loose after I worked so hard to inseminate them, and they lovingly murdered them for me. And then
Hmm.
I figured out in my CSI investigation what the heck happened here. Murder scene. There was always queen cells. So then, like I said, I learned from the burn. So I'm like, okay, I like to play. We'll play here. So what I would do is I would just hold them, and I would wait. It's an egg for 3 days. The perfect age larvae on day 4. That's when we're grafting. Day 5, not ideal, but they can make it work. 6, they might still try it. Bob Benny looked at me funny whenever I told him this. Day 7, 8, or 9, after you made the split, cut those cells.
Mm-hmm.
Now they still have brood, so they're cohesive, they're tight, and they still think they have a little bit of hope, but the only hope they have now is that virgin queen. There's no cells. So what I recommend people do is if you order queens from me, as soon as they show up, make your splits, or you can make them the day before they show up. Tape or cap over the candy and stick them in there. Leave them alone for a week. I know this is going to make some of you lose sleep. Leave them alone. Go back 7 or 9 days after you made that split, cut all the queen cells, and then let them candy release. And I can't tell you how many people get 100% take out of that. You know, I wouldn't expect that. Don't expect 100%. You know, this is beekeeping here. We got to be realistic. But
I was writing down 100% over here.
yeah, right. But that's the best way to get them introduced. And I found out, I learned that in a roundabout way, but I found out that it mirrors nature. Like if you get in a colony that's in an advanced swarming state, what does the queen do before they take off? She quits laying. So a lot of times in nature, when those virgins start coming out, there's no larvae that they can raise cells out of. Not every time, because they're in advanced swarming state anyway. They've already got their cells. But oftentimes when the virgins come out, there's no eggs and there's no young larvae, and your take will just go through the roof.
So there's a question: does Cory ship cells from Loma Vista B? And I don't think that you do, Cory.
I hate it, and I think the main reason why is because it doesn't match my grafting schedule well. Like I still work the day job. Hopefully we can remedy that soon. But I'm grafting every Monday. So the following weekend, I've got queens emerging. That gives me time to put attendants in them, get them in candy cages, and ship them out on Monday. Well, with cells, I could probably ship them Thursday for Friday, but anytime UPS misses delivery, they're goners. They'll be dead because they're emerging the day you get them, later that day and the next day. So they starve out really quickly, where virgins, if they miss delivery, it's no big deal. They've got 6 attendants with them, and they're just happy they got candy. And so if I go full time, they're way more forgiving. Will I do that if I don't have a day job? Probably, because then I can stagger my grafts and I could ship them midweek or something. And yeah, I'm open to it, but up to now, I just have done, pickup only.
So what I did with the queens that I received from you is I am a cell guy. I'm sure that I've used virgins before, and I find them pretty easy to use, quite easy in the spring months. But once we start getting into late July and August, it's not that it's not doable. It's just a little bit trickier.
Yep.
And I prefer queen cells myself. But I also have always picked them up, and 99 times out of 100, they're my own queen cells. So they're very close and convenient. But when I picked up the queen cells from you, I created my splits about 5 days before I received the cells. And so by the time I got back home with the cells from you, the colonies had already raised any cells that they had wanted to. And then I went in there as I was dropping the cells, checked all the brood frames, crushed any that they tried to make themselves. And then there was no hope of them being able to do anything except with that queen. And then you don't touch them, whether it's a virgin or if it's a queen cell. You do not peek in early. You wait till those queens have gone on their mating flights. They have come back and they have been laying. I would prefer 5 to 7 days at the earliest. It'd be better if they were laying closer to 7 to 10 days before you even made the first inspection. And when you do, it's extremely light inspection.
Right. Looks like
Ian. To tear. Oh, Ian has a question. Well, we can ignore him. It's my YouTube channel. I do what I want.
I wonder, did his pack show up in Canada yet, or did it get hung up at Border Patrol? I wonder if he got that yet.
I don't know. Cory, how do you manage the virgins immediately after hatch? Do you provide feed or just let them gorge on leftover jelly?
That's a really good question. Whenever I know they're coming out, my kids, like they've handled more queens than most beekeepers have ever dreamed about handling. But the kids will go through them and inspect them. And if they're wiggling already, we just put them in a candy cage. That way you don't have to wait, because if they hatch on their own, they expend a lot of energy chewing through that cap and they'll run around. Some of them, in a natural environment, they can eat right away or somebody will feed them. And if you don't, man, those things will start to curl up. So, first order of business is get them in a candy cage quickly. And then within 48 hours, you need to put attendants in there with them. They're cool for 24 to 48, but but you got to put attendants in within 48 hours. Ian he has not got the package yet. Dang. It's on
Well, I remember when Ian did a Zoom for one of the Hive Life conferences on the first year that we had it, and we pay our speakers. Someone actually was ranting on Facebook the other day that we don't pay our speakers anything, which maybe we should consider that. No, I don't think that's going to work very good. It might work one time. But anyway, so I was mailing up a check for Ian's Zoom, and I mean it took like 2 months to get that
Yeah,
sucker up there. It was just a letter, it wasn't even
yeah,
a package. But
yeah. This
uh,
is 2 boxes, so man, there's no telling. I hope it makes it.
the Mounties probably confiscated. um, So here's a question from Harry Vanderpool of Vanderpool Farms. Even with purchased mated queens, we introduce, as Cory advises, about 98% acceptance rate in most years. So
Absolutely.
it's something that new beekeepers need to understand, that there's a lot of dynamics to even introducing queens. What are the age of the bees? Are there young bees in there? Also, do they have anything to work with? Because sometimes if you let them start, I think a lot of people assume that if there's a queen in there, like a mated queen, that she's going to go around and sting those cells
Yeah.
and eliminate them. And that's not the case. Mated queens really have no desire to go around and tear down cells. They just want to lay.
Yep.
And so if they start those cells just a little bit, the queen, I've seen this several times, the queen will go around and start laying and she'll do her job. But as soon as that virgin comes out of that cell, bam, that queen's dead.
Yeah. Yep. That's true. And if you pay good money for something, you want to make sure. So that's why I use, where I wait 7 to 9 days and then cut them, because there is absolutely no way they can make anything else. And really, I started doing that with my cells too. I came and said he waited 5, 6 days. That's good. I just, well, because I'm on a weekly schedule anyway, it's easy for me to let it sit 7 or 8 days, and then I come around and drop it in there. And you can do that multiple ways. You can move it to another yard and feed it, and where they're low stress and they're healthy, cut the cells, put cell, virgin, or mated queen in. It works with all three really well. Or yeah, I mean that's just what I've used. Or you could pull it up over an excluder, shake all the bees off and pull all your brood frames up and let it set 7, 8 days, and then make your splits and add your queens to it whenever they come up. So
Exactly. Um, Now, for those of you who didn't see it early on, Cory does have a YouTube channel of his own as well, and we're going to bring that up and give that to you guys, because there's a lot of information to cover in regards to VSH and so much more. And if he's got other information there and poor jokes as well. Um, Ian says those are my specialty, but I actually just got the edited footage last night of the conference.
nice.
So I'm really excited. I'm listening to that because I didn't get a chance to listen to anybody's lectures, and we're now editing those and getting those up. So those will be available on the Hive Life Conference website soon. And Cory sat in unscripted on a couple things. Again, it's kind of like your thing, Cory. It's just like, who do we get? Who do we get? Hey, there's Cory over there. again? We couldn't find anybody else.
We were
Uh,
texting back and forth, and you're like, "How many times did you speak?" I'm like, "2," but neither was my fault. First was Chris Summers, and then Etienne, which I love that dude. I'm so glad you had him there. I wish I would have got to hang out with him more because he's
yeah,
got such a depth of character. I didn't get to hang with him, but he was responsible for the second round. I tried to resist Cayman, but
yeah. He is really cool. All of our speakers were really cool, and I'm just very thankful to be able to bring them all into one spot because it to me it's just like it's a blast. You get to I get to see your videos, Ian's videos, Richard Noel's, Etienne, and yeah, everyone's from so far away, but through Hive Life we can actually meet everybody. It's a lot of fun. Obviously, we get to see King Bob. He's a staple of Hive Life at this point. He's been there since the beginning, and Bob's just a great friend and a great beekeeper. And um, somebody asked me actually this year, like, well, Bob's been there every year. Are you thinking about having Bob back again? I'm like, hey, as long as Bob Benny wants to come to Hive Life, even if he doesn't want to speak, we're paying Bob to come up.
open invite.
That's right. Bob's basically got his own everything. He's like, this is King Bob's seat. He hates being referred to as King Bob. I think we need to just make a King Bob T-shirt.
Yeah, I would buy one.
Yeah,
Ian says King Rockstar Bob.
I was talking to him yesterday, and he's like, "Well, I'm like, so would you like being called King Bob or Uncle Bob?" He's like, "Well, I really don't like either one of them." Problems of the rich and famous.
Yep.
Yeah, but yeah, Bob for president. There you go. Now Bob, I've seen him get upset before. It's like that much compared to my upset. Yeah, yeah. I've seen him get upset. It's like, what's this? What happened here? And I'm just like, oh my goodness, Bob's blood pressure actually began to go somewhere, and but no, he's chill. If he's on medication, I need that so bad.
Got the right one. Yeah.
Right.
I think it's more than that. I mean, the wisdom that dude exudes too, and the patience for young bucks like us.
So we got a couple more questions here. I'm having difficulty storing mated queens. A lot end up dead. Any tips on how to store queens and to keep them alive? So this is more like, I guess, banking queens.
Mm-hmm.
Cory, I don't do that a lot. Mostly 7 days is the longest I typically go, and typically not even that long. So what do you kind of do when you have to do that?
Yeah, if I'm going to make a bank, banks can be super finicky and they can really hose you, as Dominican beekeepers seen. If they're not in the mood to take care of those queens, or they're not adequate, they don't have adequate stores, sometimes they'll just let them die or starve them. And so the best banks that I've used, and I don't bank a lot either, Cayman, but if I have a spent cell builder, that's just a giant double deep colony, and they don't have anything to make queen cells out of because they've been making queen cells for me, I'll take those out and I'll just put cages. You've got one of those frames where you can hold all the cages in it, or in a pinch, I've just put an empty super on top and just lined them on the top bars. And those things take ridiculously good care of a queen. But I look at it the opposite of wine. I don't like to store. I really like those things running around in their own nuke or their own colony, laying as nature intended. Banking, I would say, I try to avoid it if I can. But
Absolutely.
yeah.
And when we bank, what we do is, like, let's say we have 15 queens that we just don't have the time to get to right away or whatever. We'll take there's shipping boxes and different things that queens will come in, or a nice ventilated container. If I don't want to set up and this is a short-term bank right here, and this is like 7 days max, we will just shake nurse bees out into a nuke box and just shake, shake, shake. We get all these nurse bees because all the foragers fly back, and I will put 2 pounds of nurse bees onto 15 queens, and then they constantly have a sponge for water. They constantly have very thin sugar syrup, and they're all nurse bees. Now, this is a short term bank. It works very good for me, but if you're wanting to bank them for weeks, you have to have a strong nurse bee, good nutritional environment, and a lot of attention for each queen. But the longer those queens are banked, the worse and worse the situation's going to get.
Agreed. And you mentioned watering a sponge to keep those queens watered. To tack on to what Ian asked about earlier, whenever I put those virgins immediately in a candy cage so they have candy, and then within 48 hours I add attendant, I can keep those things for weeks, which isn't ideal, but I know I can do it because I'll hold them in an incubator till day 9 or 10 before I inseminate them. And if you water them daily, you'd be surprised if you've got really good attendance how long you can keep those things. If you don't water them, they're done pretty quick.
So Ian says that he's shaking his head. Yes, throughout this whole production, excellent content. So awesome. I paid him $200 to come on here and say kind things about it. So that $200 was well spent. No, that's really nice of Ian to say. No, we do need to get Cory to do some speaking at Hive Life one of these days and work up a presentation. And it's really past due at this point. We were really heavily considering it this year, and we ended up not. It just didn't work out. But there's always next year,
It worked out.
and so. Yeah, well, you weaseled your way up on stage, anyways. I mean, we cannot. The camera loves you, but so Cayman and Cory, what are your thoughts on 14-day versus 21 plus day queens? And Cory, I'll let you go on that one.
Yeah, I mean, back to Hive Life. Whenever I was listening to Bob talk about Chris Werner's queens and how good they were because he was keeping them in a nuke longer. I mean, that's the thing too, is why I stopped selling open mated queens because I had the day job, but I was leaving mine in there 3, oftentimes 4 weeks. So there's a huge difference because it's the same. It's, you're looking at the whole process like a virgin queen. Why are there some issues introducing virgins? Well, if you don't have that hive set up, she's not making a full pheromone set. So, if you pull a queen out of a colony, they want to make queen cells, and eventually, if that doesn't work, they'll make laying workers because their ovaries start working. So if you put those open mated queens in there, that's why they're easier to introduce sometimes, because it suppresses the urge to make another queen or have laying workers. So long story short, Greg, the longer they can stay in a nuke, the better off they are, the better acceptance you're going to get, the least amount of supersede you're going to get, and the better they'll perform. And Bob, talked about that extensively at Hive Life.
Yeah, his talk on that is extremely good, and I was actually watching some of the recording of that last night, and the audio is great. Bob Benny sounds like he's got a Cayman Reynolds loud voice in the recording. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Which at the Hive Life was not very good. Honestly, I'm still struggling with only having about half of my voice strength. It comes and goes. I'm on the phone all the time, and like I'm speaking tomorrow actually. So hopefully that'll work out.
It'll work out. You're sounding pretty good.
Does Cory play a musical instrument for a bluegrass band?
Unfortunately, no.
Spoons?
I could do that. Yeah, I used to be a percussionist. I used to play piano too, but man, I've forgotten so much. I don't think it's like riding a bicycle. I can still ride a bike, but yeah.
So when do you typically have cells and virgins available, Cory?
Well, there's usually like a 3-week swing, but I start grafting sometime between the last week of March and mid-April. Once every 5 years, it seems like I'm grafting in March. So usually mid-April to mid-June is pretty safe. I try to shut down in mid-June until Cayman calls, and then I got to fire it back
Queens,
up.
man.
Right. But normally I try to wrap it up by mid-June. We did good last year because there was still a nectar flow, but sometimes I hit a nectar dearth around mid-June to late
Mm.
June, so I try to wrap it up. So
That's very similar to what we experience. Let's see here. So when will the audio be ready or videos from Hive Live? So that should be very soon. It's just now we have to upload them, and there's just a slight bit of editing left, not a whole lot. Um, One of the things that Terry Richards says that he's got other questions non-related, but he's got them written down. That's awesome. So any of you guys keep those questions. I'm going to be having a just Q&A coming up Saturday of next week. So um, that is today is the 3rd, so 4th, that is the 11th of February. That will be just a Q&A day, and bring all of your questions, the ones that you want to talk about, like when are we going to get that King Bob shirt, those kind of things. And Ian says, Cory, do you have a YouTube video on virgin management introduction or your basic queen introduction? And I'm going to add, if you don't, then why don't you?
that's a great question, Ian. I do, but I'm going to point to a couple of different sources. Like I've shared it on my Facebook page, but I recently did a talk for Sustainable Beekeepers Guild up in Michigan, and it was basically virgin queen introduction, and I covered from cell building is way more than just virgin intro, because I can tell you that in 5 minutes, like I did. Check that out, the SBGMI video, or Nathan from Duck River Honey, if you're familiar with his work. He came out to the farm too and asked some killer good questions. And there's one called Pro Level Queen Introduction, and I shared that on my Facebook page too. But to Kamin's point, and he's absolutely right. I will record that, you know, possibly with some Q&A and somebody talking to, so it's not just me gabbing at a screen. But yeah, I'll articulate that a lot better and put more videos out on that. So as of now, I would check those 2 videos out. I feel like I articulate it pretty well in that, but I'll add something to my channel too.
And down there's Cory Stevens' YouTube channel link, so you can see the videos that he has right there. And it was fun coming out to your place, Cory. The queen cells were all in very good shape.
Mm-hmm.
All the ones that I received, I didn't have any issues, and that was we got a great take on them during a tougher time of the year. And the queens came back, laid some good patterns. It was a little bit of a drive to get to you. I think it was probably around a little over 5 hours one way.
Yeah, I was thinking so.
But it was good to try some new things out, and I'm hoping that I have more time. And so that's kind of the issue that, some people are like, Cayman, why don't you get more into this genetic thing? I just don't have the time,
Mm-hmm.
Hive Life, YouTube. I'm going to probably gear way back on my speaking engagements. I really enjoy going to bee clubs and talking to folks and getting to meet them, but I just don't have the time. And so you can only do so many things in a day. And that's why it's so crucial that the few people that are willing to put real effort into these key areas like Varroa resilient bees, we need to, I think, support them in some way or the other. And I think that Cory's doing some good work. Obvious, if he was not doing good work, we wouldn't have him on the YouTube channel. So I don't let this go to your head, Cory. I've already talked to your wife, Jamie, to make sure that she reminds you of all the boneheaded stuff that you've done in your bees in the last few years.
Who does, absolutely. But she keeps me grounded, and I give her grief earlier. But just like you and Laurel, I have to give her props. I mean, there's no way I could, have my kids be upstanding citizens, breed awesome bees, have a day job, and work on a master's degree too without her. So I mean, it wouldn't happen without the queen.
Oh yeah, the queen. Very, very good. I think you almost saved the whole thing between you and your wife on this thing. But no, Jamie's sweet. I was talking to her at the Missouri conference where you and I were speaking last year, and she's way more intelligent than you are.
Oh yeah. Hopefully it's genetic. Maybe the kids will win.
Yeah, that's right. Well, but you did well. You married up, and it's not easy to
Yeah.
always do that. So
Yeah.
congratulations, Cory. Um, Edward's got a question real quick, and then we're going to shut her down just because I told Cory we keep it about an hour, but it's beekeeping, so here we are at an hour and a half, and could go for three. What is
Yep.
the best way to transport queen cells?
That's a good question. Usually, like if I ship them, they're in. Have you seen those JZBZ shipping bars? The orange ones. You can get them in varying lengths. Well, they've.
I, I know
Have you
what
seen
those
them,
are.
Kane? Well, yeah, you did because you picked up some. You had them before, but when the cells you picked up from me were in those shipper bars, and then I get the JZBZ cell protectors. They're a little bit wider diameter, and they're the four prong, not the two with
Hmm.
the really long, but like four on each side. And the cells will fit in there, and you can arrange them where they fit in that bar really nicely. So they're
Hmm.
kept upright. You can keep them in an incubator. Um, I think Ian has a really cool, like a carry cell that keeps them upright, insulated, and keeps them warm. So that's the thing too. If they're ripe, if they're about to emerge, if they're about to emerge, and you're just running to the bee yard and you've already got your splits made, you can you can really get away with that as long as you don't freeze them or bake them. You can just run over there and keep them in. You don't even really necessarily have to have an incubator. They're a lot more hardy when they emerge.
Yes, and if you have an incubator, how I transported mine from your house, and they did awesome, was I just had one of those Hovabators by this GQF.
F, I
Yeah,
love
and they're real simple. I just had an inverter that plugged into my car, and it kept the temperature just where I needed it. I had some sponges in there to keep the humidity up, and I just drove the whole way back like that, and then kept them in that when I did get back home, and it worked out flawlessly for me, and the thing paid for itself, and the trip, in my opinion, because those cells did really good. And I got to say, big thanks to Vanderpool Farms. I'm always encouraging people to hit the thumbs up button. That's how YouTube works. And so the more you watch our videos, the more you watch Cory's videos, the more thumbs up, the more comments. That helps our videos perform well. It also helps more of our content to be recommended to you. But we will be definitely seeing you guys, if you're able to make it, on the 11th. This won't be the last time we work with Cory. We definitely have a lot of fun on our bee conversations over the phone, and I know I am pulling for you to quit that job and be able to do more work for us beekeepers, and that's what we need. We need people to make money and be able to go full time and be able to devote all of their energy towards the bee industry to enrich it and to innovate it.
I agree, and I thank you so much, Cayman, too, because being able to talk to people, YouTube's a great invention, and people that follow you, generally have their heads squared, have screwed on straight for the most part. There
Oh,
may be some
really?
outliers. I feel like you have good
Well,
information,
Greg Burns was on this channel a minute ago, so I mean, it's not perfect.
but you make it an attempt to have the best information out there that's truthful. It's not snake oil. It's something that works. And I thank you a lot for having me on because it means a lot and getting the word out. Maybe I can actually make a break from the day job. So thank you.
I I I think so, Cory. I've got some ideas. I know you got some ideas, and the bee industry is hungry for change. The time is now, and now it's starting to sound like we're at church and we're welcoming people to come up to be saved. So,
Heck yeah.
wow. uh, but we're
We need,
it,
we
it,
need
it's
saving, and so do the bees, Cayman.
amen. So, maybe not came, maybe a loose screw. Hey, there's more than one screw loose. Absolutely. But we have a lot of fun. We all love bees. I think Hive Life is just an embodiment of what we have going on YouTube and what beekeepers are already feeling on the inside. We love talking about bees. We all want to be able to keep our bees alive. We all want to be able to be successful and be that bee lady or bee guy that's got the honey. That's that cool guy, and it really is something special. It always has been, but it's the basics start with keeping our bees alive and being successful, and then being able to teach others how to go and do the same. And there's a lot of different routes to get there: 8 frame equipment, all mediums, deep boxes, carnies, Russians. I think VSH could possibly be one of the solutions to making things better for queens. There's a lot to that, though, and it's a lot of work. So we appreciate that you're willing to tackle hard things. That's what we need, is men and women who are going to tackle our biggest challenges, which currently right now are Varroa and genetics. And thank you for doing that. So, Cory, I'm going to let you go. Take care, buddy. We'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you, Cameron.
See you, everybody.